My name is Jamie Jonkel, and I'm with Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks here in Region 2. And this is an introductory workshop on electric fencing for goats and chickens and pigs and apple trees and gardens. The emphasis of this workshop, though, is how to keep sort of the urban interface predators out of chickens and goats and pigs and sheep, because almost every week we get 2 or 3 phone calls about chickens being killed by bears, or goats being killed by foxes, or sheep being killed by coyotes. And when livestock are depredated on in the state of Montana, by state law, an individual that lodges a complaint can have those animals destroyed. And so much of it can be prevented by doing a little electric fence preventative fencing. And so today we're going to talk about the basics of electric fence, and then talk about some of the styles of electric fence that work for lion versus wolf versus coyote versus bear, and then go through a series of props. Today we have Erin Edge, who is the Bear Aware Coordinator for Missoula here. She keeps track of the new website. And what's the name of the new website here in Missoula?
MissoulaBears.org.
And then we also have Scott Mackey, who's with Cenex. He's the brains of electric fence. He can answer all the questions about how electricity works on electric fences, and how to correct problems that occur when you aren't getting good shock. And then I can talk and answer any questions about various predators we have around Missoula. And with that, I'll let Erin do a little introduction here, just about the website maybe, and some of the Bear Aware stuff in Missoula.
We used to just be rattlesnakebears.org, but recently we decided to switch and encompass all of Missoula, since we have issues in Grant Creek and 9 Mile and all over the place. So right now what we're doing is we are tracking bear sightings on there through people are able to fill out a form. They can also fill out a form on attractant sightings. They can also read up on studies that are going on in the area. And we also post all bear activity alerts and information on that website. So if you're interested, go to MissoulaBears.org, and you can find out a lot of information about not only bears that are things that are happening with bears in the area, but also preventative measures you can take. That's all on the website.
And before we have Scott do an introduction on electric fence, maybe Beth Ann, do you want to just say something about why you sponsored this workshop?
My name's Beth Ann, and I work here at Missoula Urban Demonstration Project. And this workshop is because if you're going to have a garden in Missoula, you want to make sure that you're a responsible gardener, and that includes considering the wildlife that are your neighbors. So we're really glad that Jamie and Scott and Erin can join us, and we're glad that you're watching. Thanks.
Ann has a chicken here in her arms. We get a lot of calls in and around Missoula County about chickens being depredated on by lion, fox, coyote, bear. And just this last summer, we've had over 25, maybe 30 depredation reports. And sadly, quite a few black bears and a few lions have had to be destroyed because of this depredation. Electric fence can solve that problem. A good coop that has an electric fence around it, or a yard that has a nice electric fence for open range chickens, can keep some of those predators out. And with that, I'll have Scott Mackey launch into the basics of electric fence.
We're going to start with on fencing. We talk about 2 different things. There's two circuits in fencing. One's your ground and one's your hot fence. We don't have any set up. We, we've all seen insulators. Insulators are those things that hold. Usually, the old style you'd see is when you have a green post set in the ground and it has a yellow insulator on it. That still kind of works around livestock alone. It doesn't work around wildlife. The reason it doesn't work around wildlife is when wildlife have a tendency, when they get started into something like a deer or something, if they get shocked, if they've got their head through it, they lunge forward. And then what happens, even if they pull back, they'll rear up and they'll snap the insulator off. And when you snap that insulator off, the fence comes down, it hits the post, and then it goes dead. You can see around we have a lot of different ones. These are posts. Well, this is a post, and I have them from. This is a fiberglass post. You have them from 4 foot tall, 3/8 inches around. This is a 8-footer. It's for a elk bear fence, and you put it in the ground 18 inches or 2 feet, and it comes up 6 foot tall. And this is a stay to hold the wires, and then you hold them in with something like that, and they just go in and they crimp over, and your wire goes through these little things here, and what that does is it creates something that when livestock or wildlife hit it, they don't knock it loose, and it doesn't go down. But if it comes loose and it hits this is insulate. This is like an insulator. It doesn't conduct electricity, and you don't have it shorten your fence out. What happens with fence is you have a ground system. It's just like a house. In a house you got 3 wires running through if you've done it. But you got to have at least 2. You got to have a neutral, or they call it a ground. Yeah, there you go. A sleeve. You got to have a neutral, you got to have a ground, neutral or ground, and then you got to have the positive or the hot wire, we call it in fence. And the hot wire has to touch. Now on this ground here, it's damp. It's been out today. That's great. All you got to have is 1 wire. If you're standing on that hot ground, you got a good ground system going. You touch the wire and it'll shock. And if it's always going to be wet in a yard or something, you can get by with 1 6-foot ground rod in the ground in a place where it's getting damp. You put it clear in so it isn't seen. Don't put it where you're going to run over the end of it with your truck or something and put a hole in it, in a tire. But you need a ground and you need a hot. The ground, if you're up there on the hill where it's dry, you got to have more ground than that. We sell, or you can get a system. They recommend 3 of these placed 10 feet apart, clear down in the ground. If you can't get them all the way in the ground, only halfway, we'll cut them off and put the other half in. They say 8, excuse me, one of the things they say is 8 out of 10 fencing problems that you can't solve by your eyeball is a ground problem. You just gotta have, see now that'd be good to put a ground in. But it, you gotta have a ground. You gotta have a good ground. The number 1 thing about fencing to have it trouble free is to do it right the first time. Don't short. And I'm not saying spend a lot of money, but don't short it. Realize everything's gotta have a ground, everything's gotta have a hot. Now in the winter time, this ground when it freezes is an insulator. You cannot keep a single strand fence working well in the winter on snow. You can't keep it on ice because it insulates you from the ground. So what you do is you get a fence. Our most popular for a livestock containment is a 3-wire fence, and you can see how many holes are in this one for a fence, but every other one is a ground. This one's a hot, this one's ground, this one's hot, this one's ground. And what that does is it keeps it from, I can't use both hands, this is really tough. When you only have one, anybody hits it in between there, it shocks them. And then when you get to wildlife, Jamie will tell us more of this probably, but wildlife like deer and elk and such, they have hollow hair on them, and that does not conduct electricity, and it's harder to shock them. And that's why a lot of times you don't turn them with an electric fence. But if you take them and see down here where the deer scoot through, if you have them close together and you got a hot one on the ground, what happens is you hit them, and you hit them between the nose and the chin or the eyeballs where that hair is thinner, or else you hit them up on the ear tips, and then all of a sudden it turns them back. The other thing is you have to train the animals, and especially you can train bear and deer and everything else. If you train them, if you set something up and then you set like, one of the things you do is along if you're going around that tree and you've got something going around it, or even on those over there, you take that stuff and you can put a little piece of tin foil on it, and then they'll sniff it to find out what's going on, and it'll bite their nose. And they haven't got into it when they get shocks, so it turns them back instead of causing it. And every time an animal gets its head through and then it gets shocked, it's going to want to keep going the same direction first. Whether it's, I don't know, I haven't seen any other one that won't. If you've got another good thing to use is peanut butter. You put peanut butter out there on the hot wires, and they can smell it, and their tendency is to do what? Lick it. Can you imagine anything that's more sensitive to electricity than a tongue? It's moist, it's clean, and it just turns them, and it creates a shock or a pain that is immediately and memorable. If it's immediate and memorable, don't you remember that when you're taught? Mm-hmm. If it causes pain quickly, and it's non-lethal. That's the wonderful thing about it. You can create something without causing permanent injury, maybe some psychological damage, wondering where it came from, what it was, how it happened, but that's great because then they stay away from there. And about the third time it happens, generally speaking, they learn to sense that. There are bears up the Blackfoot region who will be turned by a fence that is a 3-wire fence, a ground, a ground and a hot, and there's a path around the fence because those bears have been shocked before. Mm-hmm. Theoretically, they could get right through it, but they can sense electricity. The hardest things to keep out are sometimes are the deer. And you can do that with different fences. You can do it with starting about out. If this is your fence, you start out here and you this is your garden fence or area. You start out here with 2 wires and the top one's about this high. Then you come back in here and you put 2 more wires and the top one's this high. And that, I don't know how that works, but it sure confuses them.
Kind of staggered then?
Yeah, it's a staggered look. It's, they were telling me that it's in here. We'll see if it really is. Said it was on the inside cover. See, I didn't believe him anyway. But anyway, I can show you some pictures that I have on my computer, but this isn't a computer day.
No.
Anyway.
So let me get this straight. So in all electric fencing, the animal has to bridge the ground wire to the hot wire.
Right.
That's the secret, right? It has to touch
right.
both of those at one time.
And all of them you set up on. Okay. See, I told you we got to.
Well, you can get a shock out of the soil.
Sorry about that.
But it's not a good shock. Whereas if you have the ground wires there, you don't have to rely on the soil.
You can get a good one. On this one, if I took this one, this is where the hot comes out. This is where the ground comes out. Okay, I brought on purpose, when I brought the ground rod, I brought a clamp. And this is after 30 years of ranching and learning I wasn't always doing it right. Because this whole setup's $10. And we're too cheap to spend $10. We'll spend this is a $170 Energizer, but we won't spend $10 for a good ground rod. And this ground rod, I can put it clear in the ground. This is portable, so if I go to move, all I need is a pipe wrench or a pair of vice grips. You turn it and you can pull it right out of the ground. Unless you got it in rocks and it goes like this, and then You'll probably be back to it anyway. Paint the end of it so you can find it the next time. But you have to have, you run a clamp from there to there. Always. You have to have somehow into the ground. And then this one is your hot circuit. It goes to your fence. Now we all, when we try to build electric fences and stuff, you always have the insulators and stuff that you put wire on. There's different kinds of wire. There's two of the newer type. You can get aluminum type wire. This one's really easy to use. They'll both work for your garden or a portable fence, but that little one there, that'll work great. And it's so easy. You can tie knots with it. And you can do whatever you want, but it, sorry, I gotta use my hands. Anyway, what's interesting about this is grounds really work good especially in moist areas. If you're going to do like a 3-wire fence like we do for livestock containment, sometimes you can do a 2-wire, but you'll have a hot in the ground that run out and you can be running it for a mile. And down there you have a spot where it kind of gets boggy and it runs down through a swale or something. You can put the ground rod clear down there and then just fasten it to your fence. If you clamp it tight and do a good job of your joints, you can run it all the way back up that and just run this one to that fence, to your ground. You have to have it in the ground, but it doesn't have to be necessarily within 10 feet of this, just somewhere. And when you have them together like that, it maximizes your fence potential.
And the idea there, Scott, is they get the shock out of the soil through their feet, right?
Well,
and then they touch the hot.
Well, when you have a hot ground system, in other words, your ground's coming through one part of the fence, and your other one isn't. Then they get caught between those two, and you get a better, more. The other one, you get it through the feet. Let's say in your situation, if it's in your garden, you're going to have it. The ground's going to be moist all the time, and so if you wanted to, you could go in there, put your ground rod in the ground, run it over to your energizer, and just put it right there. Every wire you put up, the rest of it can be a hot wire because it's going to be moist. Theoretically, I'd still rather you have a couple of ground wires running between your hot wires. And the reason for that is because then when they, like if you get the deer, when you get them between there, because they are so hard to get grounded and everything, you get a better ground, and it just kind of creates a difficulty in their mind of what's happening. This brings up an interesting thing. The way this is set up, this one wouldn't work, but if you were setting up to keep lions out, you'd never set up like that to keep them out of the tree, or keep them out of your yard if that tree's on the outside, because lions will just come up, crawl out, jump in. Then how are they going to get out? Then how are they going to get out of the yard? They can't. It's hot. The fence is hot. You can't get out. So you've trapped a lion in your yard. Then you call Jamie and ask him to come get it, huh?
Which is why using trees doesn't always work, because if you use trees, then you're so close to the tree itself that bears and lions will go right up.
But if you don't have, well, I guess now in town they got bears in town too.
We got a lot of bears in town, and that's a great fence for keeping, if you got an apple tree and you don't want to have all your apples lost, you want to make some apple butter, you can put an electric fence around your apple tree to keep the bears from getting it. And the way this one would work.
That's a good way to teach. Go
yeah.
ahead.
Let's see, Scott was talking about, the importance of having a ground wire, or using the soil as a ground, and then having a hot fence. This is pretty basic here. This is your hot panel. This is where the animal would get the shock. Your ground is the soil, and you'd have your ground rod in the soil, but you would also have this attached to your ground rod. So when a bear or a lion came up to see if he could maybe squeak an apple out of here, he would be standing on the soil plus this ground pad, and he'd touch his nose to this, and he would get the full current of the shock.
Yeah, or else, and you might have, the great thing is bear's pads or lion, they don't have the hair here, so they're down on this. And the thing that might happen too you don't know which side it gets the shock. I mean, it'll come. He won't know where it comes from, but it'll go between, and it's just like anybody getting shocked. I don't know. Has anybody never been shocked? Okay.
If you've never been shocked, it's like, if it's a good energizer anyways, it's like your heart loosens out of your chest and jumps up into your throat for a minute.
I had a son-in-law working on one. They got one for buffalo, and it's a big one, and it was shorted out. And he asked the guy to go turn it off, or anyway, he undid the short, and as soon as you undo the short, it begins to work. When a fence grounds out, the energizer is no longer effective. And he disconnected the short. I think some wires had got twisted or something. And as soon as he did that, the fence worked, and he was he was sitting down on the ground. They won't kill you. They're UL listed. They're safe. One lady asked me, "What about their grandkids?" And I told them, "Well, they'll usually only touch it once." And it's just a training thing. It's not lethal, and it's not lethal to animals, and it's not a threat. If you get the quality energizers are, and I say quality, they're not expensive, meaning I'm just saying quality. They're all set up so their pulsing rate isn't dangerous to cause a fire. I mean, in extremely dry red flag days, maybe you'd be smart to shut it off. But we've never had anybody that I know of ever say, "Hey, you started a fire with it." Now the old ones did. I did that at home before they got smart enough, but that was years and years ago.
So I was going to ask you, how many of their grounds are you going to do per section of fence, and where are they going to go? Like, basically, how is it going to set up? You're talking about driving this one clear into the ground and somehow tying it into this piece.
Mm-hmm.
How many of these grounds are you going to have per, like, whatever 20-foot section of fence? Or whatever?
One.
Just one.
Yeah, it depends more on the ground than you are. If you're doing a garden, if you're doing a short section, one ground's enough.
If you guys can turn around so we can see you on the camera.
Excuse me. When you're doing a section, you only need one ground system to it, and if you're running 10 miles, you might have 6 ground rods.
Okay.
It depends on what your whole system is like. But for a yard, what are you thinking? What's your reference?
Just a general question, just in case you were talking about building like more than a small garden fence.
Right. The only thing is, you'd ought to have. Well, in a garden situation, even this one, if you've got a ground rod tied to that one, and then you're going to do those trees over there, you would maybe do something to make sure that gets down in the ground good. Either soak it up wet, and then it would pick up the ground rod that's running, or else run a wire between the two grounds. But you have to run one. You have to run one for the hot anyway, so run one over for the ground too.
Now, if you were
But
doing
you don't need a ground rod for every fence in the yard, for
Yeah.
every ground.
instead of a garden plot, if someone was going to make a fairly large goat pen or sheep pen in a really, really dry spot, they'd want to have alternating hot ground wires, but would they want to have,
You'd
let's
probably
say,
have 3 ground rods tied together and then tied to your energizer or tied to the fence.
and that's to pick as much moisture out of the soil as
No,
possible,
it's just
right?
not the moisture. It's just to get down in the ground and to have it grounded. I don't understand all the fine parts about that ground, how it works with the power. I just know you need them, and I know you need more of them. The reason they don't work in dry areas, most of the time, people start wondering why their horses are getting out in the summertime in this August, and the ground went dry. The ground's dry and they're on a dry spot, and your energizer stays grounded. It says it's putting it out, but you're not stopping them.
Now,
See, we
Scott,
should have had Larry.
I get a lot of people that go down and they buy an energizer, but it's not a really good, strong energizer. It's a lower joule rating, and it's a little cheaper, and it just doesn't work. and I get a call and says, hey, you know, I took your advice and I put up an electric fence and bears are still walking through it. Would you tell folks why it's so important to have a more powerful energizer over a lighter, kind of low-cost one?
Well, it's interesting. You can buy an energizer, Jamie, that'll put out 8,000 kilovolts or 8,000 volts, and it sounds like that's a lot, but that energizer, you rate the rating on a energizer in joules. This is called a S17 energizer. It's a solar energizer. It's a little one. It's usually mainly for livestock. It's a small rating. It only has 0.17 joules on it. That's not enough to turn a bear, probably not enough to turn a deer. You need 0.8 joules or 1 joule, it's just like joules or a horsepower is in a car. And you can have a little Hyundai that has RPM, which is kilovolts, and it'll go 6 or 7 or 8 or 9,000 RPM, but it doesn't have a lot of power. I drive a diesel truck, and it gets up to, when it's really revved, it's going 6,000, but it has plenty of horsepower, and that would be the same as the joules, the horsepower. Okay. And you have to have enough joules.
So your diesel truck will go 70 miles down the highway, and so will a Volkswagen bus, but you can go 70 miles down the highway hauling a 10-horse trailer.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
that's how joules.
That's what the joules do. I have a couple of. I have this one. This is called an M150. It costs a little bit more than $100. It's a joule and a half, and that'll turn almost any bear or anything else. After you get so many joules, you rate your energizer with how many wires, how much distance you have on it. Not even how many wires. How much distance, how much vegetation, and then what you want to turn.
Well, a lot of the folks that have called about a fence that's not working, that have an S17 on their fence, you can literally grab a hold of it and you'll get that pulsing shock, but it's nothing that will force you to let go. I wouldn't do that with one of these. You don't want to touch those, but you know, and you explain that to these folks, you know, you're like, we're just using the wrong energizer on the wrong type of fence for the wrong type of animal. It works great for sheep, and it works great for maybe keeping the horses from getting in the front yard, but if you want to keep bears out, lions out, go with this big energizer.
And like horses, this works great for horses in a small situation, because they hate electricity. They don't have very much hair. It gets them good, and they're smart. And kids, it'll hold kids in.
And Scott was talking about training, you know, a bear or a lion to not go to a fence. Well, what usually happens is people, if they use a lighter powered energizer, or they have a poorly designed fence, they teach the bears, or teach the lion or the wolf or the coyote to beat the fence. So if you're going to put up an electric fence, you know, it's important to put it up the right way and spend that little bit of extra money to get the right energizer and the right materials, so that you can shock the heck out of them and train them up right the first time, because they never forget it.
Can you give us a little cost benefit analysis between how much it costs for a solar versus a plug-in versus the high and low?
If you can use AC power, you do it. There's one, we have an energizer called a Wrangler that's one step down from this M150. That's really been reliable for us. It'll turn anything in your yard. It'll turn any wildlife you got, and the cost of it is $70 about, give or take. To get the same amount out of a solar thing costs you about $300, and it's still, it's more prone to problems. Let's put it that way. You have to maintain the panel, and you have to do it right. Like I said, you do it right the first time. What I'm saying, that even if you go solar, you put it upright. It's interesting on these. It took me a long time to understand. See that on the bottom? That's for putting it on top of a T-post. And you'd be surprised. Most people want it first time they get one of these, they put it on the ground. The thing that happens when the sun goes down, you don't get as much sun. The grass comes up and grows around it. Pretty soon your battery goes dead. Oh, my Energizer's not working anymore. Well, it's not the Energizer's fault. It's got something that's competing against it. You'd be surprised how many times the problem goes away when you stick it on the post. And it just, I learned a lot of things the hard way, but to make it work right, it needs to be done right. And it's not hard, but the principles are you need a good ground. The ground has to be in a moist place, or you have to have enough ground. If you're trying to do it in the winter now, if you're trying to do it just in the summer or during the bear season, the fall, they said the bears are denning. In another month they're going to be all gone. You want to pull it out. That's great. Pull it out. You don't have to go really hard. It'll take you, once you get into it, you can do a whole garden in a day or less. It's not, you could do this whole yard in a day. And
you can do permanent and you can do portable. So
yeah.
It doesn't mean, it depends on what your needs are.
Yeah, you just don't, and it's just so effective. Can you imagine if you had nobody to tell you, and every time you reached up and hit something, it shocked you? It just is. Animals just can't stand electricity. They really learn to respect it, and it just works.
How would you go? Let's say you did buy one of the solar ones.
Uh-huh.
Can you give us some tips on testing the wire?
You bet. Well, the whole thing.
So you know if it's actually enough or not enough.
Yeah, it's easy.
Besides just grabbing it yourself.
If we didn't have this on, I'd tell you the old story of the people of the guys that tested it. But what you do, we sell testers. How's that? You can also go to different websites and stuff, and you can test it with your, I don't know how to tell you to do it, with your radio on your truck or your car, with the radio. And you can hear it buzzing, but I can't remember how they do that. I cheat. I have a tester. I don't have it I have it in my truck. I keep it with me all the time. They make a tester. You go around, for these guys that have a lot of fence, you touch it, and it'll tell you how much power you got coming in it, and it'll tell you where you've got a short in it. And it'll save you hours and hours of time. I have customers that have 10 miles of electric fence, all in one system. And you can walk out in the morning, be by the Energizer, and touch it with his tester, and you'll know how good your fence is probably running all the way.
If you wanted to, if you were really interested in only using solar, and you didn't mind spending more in an initial outlay, could you put more of these things in initially to begin with? And then another couple of related questions is, in the dark Montana winter, basically, are you ever going to have a problem with this thing basically not recharging?
No. Let's start first. If you come in and we spec out your fence, I can put you a setup that'll work all the time. And what we do is we go to other things that have, more storage capacity. We have, that one. That's a 5-watt panel. We have Energizers. Well, we can do anything you want, and money does become the issue. But yeah, you can go solar all the way, and it'll do a great job for you.
You said there could be an issue of having to work on it. Now, what exactly does that mean?
What I'm saying, it goes back to, did you put it in? Is your installation right?
Gotcha.
If
you do it right, you won't have to.
Right. If you do a good job on it, there's not problems. It's just, you don't walk out and push it in, hang it on the wall and plug it in and then walk away. You have to build your brackets. You have to make sure that if you're out on the range, that you do something to keep the livestock, wildlife and stuff from coming and rubbing against it, or because they're expensive, those solar panels and stuff. You can get I've got one system out there that's a 7-joule system, and I think that it was $1,300 for the setup. You run it off a 12-volt battery, like a big deep cycle marine, like they put in a boat, and it'll keep it well charged, and it keeps it good and hot. It'll work for a week without recharging. But the solar panels to keep it up, they make even bigger ones. You can just really go to town on them and do a very nice job. Have a good looking setup. And it's yeah. In other words, yeah, you can have a great one.
And what would the life of all this equipment be if you were going solar?
Well, I've never found out, and it's always, we sell with a 2-year warranty, but they're easy.
Mostly.
Yeah, your battery will go out in 5 years. You have to replace the battery. And these little ones, you're lucky to get 4 or 5 years out of them. But you can replace the battery, and you can also, I can rebuild that, and if I have the part, I can rebuild it in a half hour for a third of the cost of a new one. And the bigger ones, I don't know. The bigger ones, though I've got set up, haven't been out as long, so I don't know how long they last. But it depends too on the maintenance. If they're grounded out and nobody ever goes and checks them for 2 months, they don't like to run grounded out as well.
I have a question. Like most people, I think, their purposes can be served with these plug-in energizers. They're cheaper or lower cost. I mean,
right,
than your solar energizers. And with a good extension cord, you can reach out there quite a ways and electrify a sheep pen that's kind of over on the back 40, or some apple trees out there about 80 yards. But a lot of people don't have the benefit of electricity that are living in remoter areas, or beekeepers, for example, that have these remote bee yards. With a solar system, how does the joule rating relate there? As long as your solar-powered energizers still have a 0.7 joule rating, and you have a good marine battery, they're just as good, right, as a plug-in?
Your 0.7 joule rate. If you're using what's set up and specified for the energizer, you're still getting the same amount. I mean, horsepower is horsepower, no matter what's providing it. Sometimes you have a better engine that provides it, but if you set it up right and you follow the specs, that's why I say do it right the first time. That's what it comes back to. Do it right the first time. It will work. It's when you start cobbling, it's when you start saying, well, I set this up and it's working good. Let's set up another one over there and another one over there, and we'll just hook them all together. And if you get out there past what your specs are, that's when you start losing. But for most of the setups we're talking about for your gardens, I didn't understand. You're just learning. Mm-hmm. For gardens and for those kinds of things, you can. It's a inexpensive. Well, not inexpensive, but it's a one-time purchase that you can use and use and use around your home and such all at once. In other words, if you decide you want to. You got the deer getting in your flower garden, you want to put something across there, if you've got a way to connect them, you probably wouldn't have to buy 2 energizers. You'd only need 1.
Now, with that comment, I was going to give a plug to a type of fence that a lot of people have been building in and around the Missoula County, and they call it a residential containment electric fence.
And you have pictures of that in your packets, too.
I do. And it's sort of, you kill all the birds with 1 stone or 1 electric fence. And a lot of folks have garbage issues. They have fruit trees, and there's all sorts of critters coming in trying to get the fruit trees. They have kids, and there's mountain lions and bears moving up and down the stream. A lot of times, if you design a nice backyard fence off of your back porch, you can essentially have all of your attractants in this back acre, all contained. and you can have your garbage cans, you can have your fruit trees, you can have your garden, you can have your chickens, and you can have your compost, and you can have your barbecue without having to do that constant micromanagement every night. It's all contained within a nice electric fence. And a lot of folks are put off with that concept right off the bat because they envision one of these sort of Auschwitz-style electric fences that are really homely and frightening looking. But you can make a really aesthetically pleasing electric fence by retrofitting wire over picket or jackleg. And I've seen a lot of people do that, and it makes their life so much easier if they're living right up against some mountain or some river. Everything is contained within that electric fence, and it really makes folks feel comfortable if they have little kids too. You know, because all over western Montana here you have lions and bears and deer and elk and all sorts of other things wandering around. And just to have a nice safe haven for your pets and for your kids, you know, in the backyard where they can play, it's something I really want to push. So, did you have a question, Jared?
Yeah, so that maybe you guys are going to get into this, but some of the different ways to set it up. What if you already have a really basic fence around your garden? Can you talk about some just ways of adding to that fence that aren't, you know, so you don't have to use all
Yeah, you don't have to start over. What you do is, I thought I had another, I guess I didn't bring it. What you can do is we sell, and we're not the only ones, but you can buy things that are called offsets. And it moves the fence out away from your existing fence, up to, 6 inches away or so. And the reason you'd move away from it, if it's a metal fence or something, is to then keep it away from getting grounded when it's hit by basically wildlife. Deer are devilish if you don't do it right, because if you drive down the road and you look at barbed wire fences, you see how many of them, there's 2 wires twisted together. And that's where something keeps sneaking through. That's what's twisting them. And so if you try to use a regular fence, if you don't get away from it, you can buy T-post clips and put it right on top and run one right down next to it. But it's going to be twisted up in it eventually because of the deer and stuff coming. If you're trying to stop the deer, if you're inside, what you do is you go, your ground system, what are we talking? What kind of fence? Give me or just any kind?
Let's do just a 4-foot chicken wire fence.
Okay, that's great. Okay, you got chickens in already. You want to keep them out of the chicken run and the chicken house. Okay, you can use just use a wood insulator around the chicken house, and it depends. Do we want it? Is it a aesthetic value in it too? You can work at that. But this one over here, which does not have great aesthetic value, but we still need to keep the bears out. You can do 2 things. One is I really like the idea they have of laying something down for them to stand on. And then you can just take and run maybe 3 wires around your chicken house except at the door. And at the door, Jamie's got several ideas he can tell you in a while on what to do at the door. But you just put the fence against it. And then out around the chicken run, that's where maybe you put these extensions on and just put 3 more wires, and then make sure that you run a ground wire over to your chicken wire. And then what happens is that bear, if he tries to climb or something, he gets his hand on the chicken wire, he gets his hand on the hot wire, and there again, it's a very positive ground, or a lion, or something like that. It's a very positive ground that shocks it. As Larry would say, it goes pow, and it gets on. I'm not Larry, so I can't do it, but it just really will shock them. And you just keep them away. Yeah, there's no sense in rebuilding if you've already got a structure. Just use your structure. The enemies of it are sagging wires that could come over and touch it and short it out. Those kinds of things. It just goes back to do it right. It means
metal building.
Yeah, metal building and stuff. You have to make sure you're staying away far enough away. If it's a metal building, say, with a chicken run out of your chicken coop's metal, there again, probably run a set of posts around your building, just far enough out. If you got a way to jam that ground wire up against that building too, keep your ground against the building. The ground will never shock you as long as it's a good ground. but you always need that ground. And then 2 wires will keep everything off of a metal building. I just can't imagine them trying to do any more than push through, and those 2 wires will stop that. But and then when you go around your other one, as long as, if you're building a chicken coop, you got to have the chicken wire. There's a couple of things you do there. When you go down, put your chicken wire on the inside and staple it to the wooden posts on the corners. You put it on the inside, not on the outside. It's a little easier to put it on the outside, but put it on the inside. Then when your hot wire's on the outside, you have about that much space between whatever the posts are. And then when you get down on the ground, fold a foot of the wire out on the ground. You can even cover it. You can plant grass over it if you've got grass right up to your chicken run, but fold it out, because weasels or dogs or badgers or whatever that are digging in to get the chickens, they'll always dig down and they'll try to go under. But when they start digging in they'll hit the wire that you've got a foot back. That just keeps them from being able to dig under.
Chicken wire skirt kind of.
Yeah.
Okay.
It just kicks out. And then you put your first wire goes about 6 or 8 inches off the ground, your first hot wire, because where do they go? They go down, or they hit it about that high, so you put another one there, and then you put one up on the top of the run to keep them from going over. 3 wires will do it.
Do you want to go over some of these?
Sure. First, we do a lot of work in the Ovando-Helmville area with the Blackfoot Challenge, and they actually have community electric fence kits that can be checked out by folks that are having issues or just need a temporary fence to keep their chickens in. Down in the 9 Mile, there's a Bear Aware group there in the 9 Mile Valley that also now has its own electric fence kit that can be checked out to the community. I don't know if Mud would be interested in something like that, but we could sure help you guys purchase some of this mesh fence, and folks are having issues, with foxes coming in and taking some chickens. As a temporary way of solving the issue, they come to Mud and check it out. You can use electricity just in a lot of different ways. These cattle panels that we have over here, with a little ingenuity, you can retrofit those on the outsides of buildings and structures. I've seen folks use insulators where they'll have these cattle panels hung on the outside of a chicken coop or a garbage shed, where even if the building is actual metal, the building acts as the ground, and this insulated cattle panel hanging on the outside of the building is hot. And you can make just the perfect electrified chicken coop. And any bear or fox trying to get in there to get at the chickens gets a heck of a shock.
And then, Jamie, could you run one single hot wire along the bottom?
Yeah, and Scott can talk about this a little bit too, but you've got all these different animals out there that are, for example, trying to kill your chickens. You got foxes, you got skunks, you got weasels, you got raccoons, you got bears, you got coyotes, and you got wolves. So a lot of people won't really be having a issue with bears, but they'll have a weasel coming in every other night and get in the chicken coop and killing 10 chickens. And you could fix that with having a hot wire just along the bottom end where that weasel, where he's trying to squeak through, would get a shock. Or if you had just one spot where this weasel was continually coming through and digging out a little hole, you could even put up a little tiny, electric fence trap. It's very handy. And if you guys had an Energizer here, a weasel getting shocked 2 or 3 times with a good jolt is going to stop coming in and killing your chickens. And a lot of times that's a lot better system than just getting a trap and trapping the weasel and killing it. There are other ways to do things. Skunks kill a lot of chickens, and there you could have a wire, that's hot, just a little higher up off the ground. You know, if he tried to go under there with his neck, you know, he'd get that shock. Coons, you know. These animals that jump, though, can be a real pain, and that's where lions can be tough. You know, if you've got a lion jumping over a sheep pen, sometimes you really have to think about how you're going to design that sheep pen so it can't jump on a post and then jump over your fence. So you have to be a little higher, like 8 feet. If you're looking at deer, trying to keep deer or elk, you know, then you have to have at least 8 feet. So there's a lot of variations for each species. I'll go through some of these props real quick. We talked about this one already, but if you can visualize this much longer and in the form of a circle around the tree, well out from the tree, it's a method of securing your apples so that they can get the right amount of sugar so you can pick them and make some apple butter and keep the dang bears out of the tree until the apples are ripe. And again, that concept is, you know, the bear stands on this ground mesh and touches this with his paw or his nose and gets that full jolt. Using this same design, you can also make a fairly decent sheep pen or goat pen. If you pull these fences together in a big circle and have it floating a couple inches above the ground so it's insulated and not touching soil, you can make some pretty darn big round pins that are fairly good goat pins, fairly good sheep pins. Now pigs, you can make a similar pin for pigs, but pigs root. And what they do quite often is they'll root soil and dirt up against your hot panel and ground it out. If you get any kind of metal or dirt or a tree or something like that, you can ground out your hot fence. So if you were going to make a big, you know, electric fence pin using this cattle panel, you'd want to have an interior extension so that these pigs would keep away from the fence, and so you'd have a hot wire on the inside as well so they wouldn't get too close to it and ground it off or ground it out. This is a similar setup. This cattle panel is just amazing stuff. I mean, you can do anything with it. You can make a nice electric structure and also rig it up so that it can be covered, and you can keep chickens out of the weather and goats out of the weather. It's just an amazing material. But here is a completely different concept. You're using the cattle panel as the ground here, or the structure that contains the animal. And this is just one example. It's kind of jerry-rigged. You guys have materials that you can buy that actually extend out and retrofit on wire like this. But you can, if you think about it, you can come up with a lot of different materials. And here, they just use fiberglass electric posts and bowed it out. And these wires that extend out from the cattle panel are the hot wire, and this is the ground wire. And if you get a bear or a raccoon trying to climb up over or through this to get into chickens or to get into goats, you know, they touch that ground and also touch that hot wire right here and get just a terrible shock. But there's a lot of different ways to use this material. Now this particular design here was rigged up for one of those round tub garbage dumpsters, those big round tubs that hold 400 gallons worth of garbage. There's no way to bear proof those, so we actually rig up an electric fence around them, and you can just open it up by opening up these two gate handles, and it springs open and the garbage truck can empty the big dumpster. But it works great for livestock and chickens, apple trees. Now this little thing that you guys are standing on is kind of fun. They call this the unwelcome mat. And let's say you have a bear coming up on your porch to access the barbecue, the bird feeder, garbage cans, or whatever. You can rig up one of these unwelcome mats. you have this rubber horse pad with a cattle panel cut to size attached to the top of it. This is your hot. This cattle panel that my foot is on goes to the hot or the positive on the energizer. The ground wire from the energizer goes into the soil, but also there's a wire touching this ground pad. And when the bear tries to come up on your porch and he stands on this ground pad and then puts his little paw on this hot pad, he gets a jolt that will teach him not to get up on your porch. We've had people having to go in and out of a garage on a continual basis, and it's just not effective to keep the door closed because there's so much traffic. But in the garage they have a year's supply of chicken feed or duck feed or whatever, a major attractant. You can rig one of these up so that people can drive over them with a tractor or a truck to get inside the building. And as long as they got rubber boots on their feet, they can walk across it too. But you can turn it on and off when you need to. But when people aren't around and they're out in the field working, if a bear or a raccoon or a skunk tries to get in the building to access it, this is there for security. And it's sort of the same concept of a cow guard, going through a gate. But the bear steps on this, or the skunk or the raccoon steps on this and gets a tremendous shock.
You can also put a metal garbage can. If you put a metal garbage can on that, it energizes the garbage can.
Exactly. So it's kind of fun to play with. We use it as an aversive conditioning tool. Like if we have someone that just refuses to put their bird feeder away and the bear has learned that he can go up on the porch and get bird feeders, if we can get there quick enough, we can set up one of these unwelcome mats and teach him that getting on a porch is not good. He'll get the shock of his life and not do it anymore. If you have a freezer in your garage, and the bear's coming in and opening up your freezer and taking out your elk meat, you can actually electrify your freezer by putting some rubber pads underneath the freezer and electrifying the freezer. You can electrify a horse trailer if you've got, let's say, a bunch of horse grain stored in your horse trailer. You can set up an energizer where your hot is the actual energizer. The insulation is the tires of the horse trailer, and you can have a ground rod there. What's that?
You have to insulate the stand too.
Yes. Yes. So there's lots and lots of different things you can do.
You're saying with this here, as long as you have rubber shoes on, I can do this, and it shouldn't shock me.
Yes, if you're insulated, it's like in the old lookouts, in the old days, they'd have their little insulated chairs they sat on, and the big bolts of lightning would come down and hit the building, but as long as you were on your safe chair with your insulators on the stool, you were okay. But
So it's just a random pair of tennis shoes?
No, your boots are okay.
yeah, your boots would be okay. I wouldn't be wearing some lightweight little slippers or anything. It'd have to be a heavy rubber boot, but it's not something I'd recommend, but if you had to walk across it, you could. But it's a tool to keep the bears out.
If your foot got wet, I have a fence, of course, it's like cobbler's. It's like cobbler's kids. I have a fence at home that I put up for my horses, and it's that real light wire I showed you. It goes along and keeps it up. In the wintertime, I have 2 wires. Well, when we want to cross the wire, you just reach up, put your foot on it, and push it down. Only one time I went out there and I'd been walking in a little bit of mud. My shoe was wet up past the sole, and I put my foot on it, and it comes right through. But most of the time, that's the way we cross it. And it doesn't shock, it doesn't hurt. You get it on the ground, you hear it pop, 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 but it doesn't do me until it's all the same. It's the principles I talked about. This is a principle thing. If you figure out how this works, it has the ground, an insulation from the hot, and they have the hot. And as long as you remember that it takes those, you can't have the hot and the ground together. You can build anything almost.
Well, like a dumpster, if you had a metal dumpster that bears were hitting, theoretically, if you insulated the wheels of that dumpster with some rubberized dog food bowls, again, you could make that entire dumpster hot. You want to make sure you had it turned off when the garbage guy came to come pick it up. But it's amazing what you can electrify. Like this is a good example. Aaron, would you pretend you're a tree? You know, we don't encourage people to have bird feeders at all. But if people just flat insist on having a bird feeder, and I've got 2 or 3 bears that have learned some bad habits, I will come in and stage a mock electrified bird feeder to shock their little lips. And using the same idea that Scott talked about earlier, where you encourage the bear to actually come in or the raccoon to come in, you would have this insulated wire up and over a tree, completely insulated, and the wire would then attach to the Energizer, and you'd have another wire coming from the Energizer going over to this ground pad. So here's your ground pad. You've got the soil, and you've got the ground pad, and you've got a bird feeder that's hot. So the bear, you know, recognizes the bird feeder, comes over, it's nice and low, and there's bird seed on there, and he's standing on here and he tries to lick up some of that bird seed. He gets the shock of his life. And you can teach him not to be coming into your yard, not to go in for your bird feeder. So that's just one example. Now, there have been people that have actually electrified their big game carcasses. They'll have a similar setup with the ground pad. They'll have the deer or the elk hanging from a game pole and have it electrified with some insulated wire, with the wire part hooked onto the foot or portion of the hind quarter, and it turns the entire animal into the hot system. And the bear tries to come in and pull down the elk or the deer, and whack, he gets a shock. And they've actually tested it and have some footage of it, and it works pretty darn good. Now, there's a lot of different types of wire you can use, and it gets complicated. I'll let Scott talk about all the varieties, but there's different gauges, different types of metals, there's poly wire, but they've got products out there that are just amazing. There is a slinky, and we have one over here in the corner. I'll walk over real quick, but it makes the wire really nice and adaptable. With these slinky hot systems, I mean, you can have a wire that can be super long and stretched out, or super short and still be an effective shocking method. And you can use 3 of them, 4 of them, 5 of them. You can have one be hot, one be ground. So it's very, very handy. Also, they make it in bungee cord material, which is really handy. I mean, you know, it's like, well, I'm not sure how much wire I need. I'll get the bungee instead. And then if you're a little off, you know, you can stretch it. If it's too much, you know, too gangly, too much cord, you can chain it and make it shorter. So it's very adaptable, very handy. But I'll let Scott talk about all the other varieties of wire, and maybe you could talk about the mesh too, the electrified mesh.
They do have a new product, an electrified mesh that goes up. I'm not sure actually what that one is. That one you got of the earlier ones?
That's the one, that powder salt one. We just brought it for an example of what
okay.
It looks like.
And the mesh one they do now is even a hot ground system.
Yeah,
and it goes in very similar, and it's a self-contained, that part of it is, and you just put an Energizer on it. The rest of he's right. I mean, we sell half-mile rolls of high tensile wire that's formulated to really conduct electricity. We sell aluminum wire. I had this couple, there's a rope, but you know, I think, Jamie, that those things would talk to individual applications more than, because the number one thing you have to remember with wire is this. Wire, an Energizer is kind of like a pump, and wire is kind of like a pipe. If you're trying to pump water, you can't pump a high volume of water through a little tiny pipe. So if you're doing a big project with trying to get a lot of juice for a long ways, you got to have something that will carry the electricity, either multi-wires or aluminum will carry much more than steel. And so we would talk applications more than different brands. I mean, if you're going to do a garden, these little rope or string type, those are great because they're so easy to use. It doesn't take a lot of special tools. You can tie a knot, and it's really easy. If you're going to do more, come see me. I'll teach you how to tie your insulator with some special not knots, but twists and turns with wire that gets done fast and quick, and people can do a nice job that looks good, I think. Any more questions? Okay, here, Jamie. Back to you back there.
Well, I think that about covers it in terms of a real basic workshop on the values of electric fence. Feel free to call us at FWP. That phone number is 542-5500. You can ask for Jamie Jonkel, or you can get on the website MissoulaBears.org. Used to be rattlesnakebears.org, and you can fire off a email to Aaron or myself, and I'm sure you could call Cenex.
Yep.
And
543-8383.
543-8383. And a lot of times when you're first starting a fence building project, the smartest thing to do is go right to Scott Mackey and have him, do a spec sheet for you. Yeah, and he'll show you how to do it the right way. If you just need some advice on, trying to keep a bear from getting on your back porch or ripping into a chicken coop, you can contact me through FWP, and I can maybe check you out a temporary fence, or I can point you in the right direction for getting a nice little system that's portable, adaptable, that you can use around your place for all sorts of different things over time. So an energizer is actually a pretty handy thing to have, and we aren't encouraging you to cobble a bunch of wire and metal together, but it's amazing what you can do with an energizer and a little wire. Learn the principles. And with that, I'll turn you over to Beth Ann here, and she can say what she needs to say.
All right, well, so once again, thanks for joining us for this mud workshop. And if you have questions or interested in other mud programs or another mud workshop, you can call us at 721-7513, or you can email info@mudproject.org or find us on the web at mudproject.org. Thanks.